I've been playing way too much Splinter Cell Blacklist, and this time you can call it a review.
Splinter Cell? What's that?
If somehow you've managed to be totally unaware of Splinter Cell until now, it's a Ubisoft franchise spanning 5 stealth action games and 1 action stealth game, and the game's plot follows the Tom Clancy novels of the same name, so as you might expect it's a lot of near-future military tech and surprisingly sophisticated terrorist plots. You play as an elite military operative known as Sam Fisher, working for the NSA, and are typically backed up by a variety of voices inside your own head.
They mostly tell me to climb through vents.
Anyone who considers themselves a fan of Splinter Cell is likely to tell you that the 5th game, Conviction, has the weakest gameplay of the series by far, and they'd be absolutely correct in saying that. It boiled down the previous game's stealth mechanics to a point where it had more in common with a decent open-ended shooter than it did with the previous games in the series.
Infinite spawns and narrow corridors, woo!
So saying that my expectations of the series were pretty low at that point is a bit of an understatement, and the announcement trailers for Blacklist focusing on the improved mark and execute shooting mechanics only reinforced my opinion.
Press X to victory.
Fortunately, as time went on, news of Perfectionist and Classic Versus mode came out, so I slowly warmed up to the idea that Blacklist might actually be a Splinter Cell game, and the idea that Spies vs. Mercenaries was making a return at all was more than enough for me to be very interested in where Ubisoft was going with it. If you go back and ask that same fan what the highlight of the series would be, they'd be very likely to shout Chaos Theory, and again, they'd be absolutely correct.
Smart fellow this fan is.
And the reason for that is simple. Chaos Theory struck a near-perfect balance between accessibility and a genuine stealth challenge. And it doesn't hurt that Chaos Theory had a mountain of content to go through, single-player, cooperative, and an expanded version of Pandora Tomorrow's Versus mode. So those are the shoes that Blacklist is gonna have to fill, and Conviction failed miserably at.
So did they fill them?
In a word, yes. Blacklist seems to have been made in an effort to please everyone, including those that liked Conviction. And I think they've succeeded. First of all, the amount of content in this game easily rivals that of Chaos Theory. You've got the full 8 to 10 hour single-player mode, an equal amount of cooperative gameplay, and the return of Spies vs. Mercenaries.
Sounds like Chaos Theory so far.
The main story of Blacklist centers around a terrorist plot and has you traveling the globe using the latest in fictional near-future military technology in an effort to figure out the identity of these terrorists, what their plan is, and to stop them.
I did not see that plot twist coming.
Aiding you in this is a team of strategists and analysts, but this time you actually get to interact with your team. That's right, after every mission you'll be sent back to your big covert 747, where you get a chance to BioWare it up with your team. It's a nice change of pace and helps reinforce the feeling of the whole operation being a team effort.
Ah crap, which ones ain't gonna make it to the credits?
And of course, it's entirely voluntary, so you can easily avoid it entirely by just not talking to your team between missions. But what is hard to ignore is the sudden absence of Sam Fisher's long-running English voice actor, Michael Ironside. At first, it was like someone had abducted and replaced a good friend of mine, but for whatever reason, I was the only one who seemed to notice, and it wasn't until very near the end of the game that I finally got over it and stopped comparing voice actors in my head. Not that I like the current Sam Fisher, it's just that the lack of Ironside isn't the issue anymore. Sam is just kind of a dick to everyone now for mostly no reason. The dry humor that the character had become known for is almost completely gone. But the most off-putting thing was the entirely overboard Sam Fisher badass play. It was like an awkwardly written television show where they tried way too hard to make one character seem badass.
Didn't anyone ever tell you that spelunking is dangerous?
Oh no! You are going to kill me, right?
Only if you say the word monkey.
Here. This file contains the names and passport numbers of all the operatives I sent Sadiq.
Grim, I'm sending you a file from Nuri's phone. Verify it for me.
Copy.
We don't have time.
You expect me just to trust you?
Sam, you've got to move.
They're almost on top of us!
Yeah, sure sounds like it, doesn't it?
Nuri's file checks out. Get out of there.
Oh, please tell me the game makes up for that.
Splinter Cell as a stealth game is back, and all the best mechanics and features from previous games in the series came with it, including the good ideas from Conviction.
Alright, I suppose there was a few.
And with a few exceptions, you're free to play the game pretty much however you like. The shooting mechanics are solid enough that you can play full shooter mode and kick indoors with assault rifles and explosions, or you can strike precisely from the shadows, quickly picking off each enemy, while using mobility in the environment to avoid ever being directly targeted. And most importantly, the game allows for those of us that enjoy a real stealth challenge to move through environments without hurting anyone or ever leaving a trace. In fact, you can play the entire game without ever killing anyone.
Sounded more like Chaos Theory by the second.
Even the post-mission report is back, which scores you on both how you decided to play the mission and how well you did. And there are hundreds of little milestone challenges that pop up for playing whatever way you decided to. Kills, knockouts, enemies completely avoided, escaping enemies that are aware of you, just to name a few. Regardless of your preferred playstyle, you'll have to deal with a fairly large variety of enemies, and included among them is my personal favorite addition to the series. Many enemies will now patrol with guard dogs, and if you're careless they will sniff you out or otherwise alert everyone to your presence. And very often you'll have them charging your position in an attempt to tie you up in a mash event that would leave you open to every enemy guard nearby. Nothing else in the game will force a pure stealth player to change their plan of action, like finding out a guard dog is in the area.
No pasa nada. ¿Qué es eso?
Calm down, boy. We'll take a look. Come here, boy.
Aiding you in your missions is a wide variety of lethal, non-lethal, and completely harmless gadgets, including a remote-controlled mini-helicopter that you can use to scout out areas and non-lethally subdue unarmored opponents. And while all of these are continually useful depending on how you want to play the game, the wide selection of weapons is almost completely irrelevant once you unlock the prototype weapons, which is very easily done provided you play any of the side missions. They are simply the best weapons in their class. Actually, it's a bit worse than that. The prototype assault rifle is by far the best weapon in the game, and once you unlock it, there's no reason to ever use anything else. So having that huge list of weapons there is just kind of annoying when you know for a fact that all of them are useless.
Area's clear.
Area's quiet. Roger that. Move on to the next area.
Mike, why don't we check out the next area?
Something happened to those lads.
Any stealth game needs to have solid AI to have any hope of just not being walked over with a single trick, and Blacklist does not disappoint. If you're playing stealth and doing a good job, enemies will act predictably, and while wandering the environment on patrol, they'll interact with things, even occasionally striking up conversations with each other, and ideally you time your movements or use a good distraction to scoot on past without ever alerting them. Enemy suspicion is handled fairly subtly. Small disturbances will cause someone to investigate as you'd expect, but there's a nice little communication system going on with the enemies that gives you hints as to how serious the mistake you just made actually is. The most obvious being whether enemies decide to call backup or not, based on the severity of the mistake you've just made. The game gives you a great sense of what you can get away with without throwing a giant HUD element in your face.
Nothing to see here.
That's not supposed to be there.
And there's also a few more subtle changes in enemy behavior that happen once enemies realize they're suddenly missing a couple of patrols, and in this state you'll find it quite a bit more difficult to lure enemies into position, and you'll no longer be able to grab enemies from the front. The game does a pretty decent job in preventing you from just abusing a single trick the entire game. But of course, sooner or later you're gonna blow your cover entirely, and the AI is no slouch in a full-blown firefight either. So if you're not paying attention, or you don't react fast enough, you'll quickly find yourself completely surrounded, and a few moments later a couple frag grenades will end up in your lap. Not that this will pose much of a threat to any seasoned shooter player. Most enemies go down in just a handful of shots, even if you don't hit them in the head.
Get on my level.
And even in the highest difficulty, which is the only difficulty I played on throughout the game, it's just not a challenge to shoot your way through. Though one of the series of side missions is a wave defense, so if you really want that shooter gameplay, you can actually get it here. Another good stealth game feature that was completely missing from Conviction is present in Blacklist, and that's alternate paths. Almost every mission, every area, every room has multiple paths to complete it. And while most of them are easy to find, like just looking up to find a vent or jumping out a window to find a ledge, there are a lot of cleverly hidden areas, so it definitely pays to search through the area first before deciding on a course of action.
You gotta look before you leap.
Simply put, the environments perfectly complement the open-ended gameplay that Blacklist offers. I often find myself reverting to checkpoints after beating a section, just to play it again in a different way before continuing on with the story. Which is why I'm so frustrated with so many of the co-op story and side missions, because unlike the solo campaign, a very large portion of them have instant failure conditions attached that require ghost play. And while that is my preferred way to play, having an instant failure condition attached prevents some of the more emergent gameplay from surfacing. The failure to stick to a game's set objectives and the flurry of mechanics and AI responding to whatever it is I did is what creates the most interesting moments in the game, especially when you've got a multiplayer environment on top of that. I mean, sometimes I just want to be able to do careless things in co-op, and then laugh as we attempt to recover from whatever stupid move I tried, and having so much of the co-op gameplay preventing that is infuriating. Technical PC issues time. First off, this is a Uplay title, so regardless of where you buy it, you'll be required to sync it up to a Uplay account. Thankfully, Uplay these days does a much better job of just getting the hell out of the way and letting me play my game. When launching that game from Steam after the initial setup and account linking, there will be no secondary menus to navigate. It will be like any Steam game you're used to playing. Though if there is a Uplay update, you will be hung up for a bit while it installs. I didn't think it was much of an issue, and Uplay does have an offline mode now. And more importantly, I've had no technical issues with Uplay at all while playing Blacklist. Visually, the game holds the Splinter Cell tradition of having absolutely stellar lighting, and texture quality is absolutely nothing to scoff at either. And once you realize how many environments are on display in Blacklist, the graphics become all the more impressive. And keep in mind, if you're looking for that 60 frames per second experience, you're gonna need at least a quad-core system. GPU-wise, the game scales very well for low-end cards. So as long as you're sitting on a decent CPU, you should have no problems running this game. On the audio side, there are a few bugs with the cinematics, and that some characters' voice tracks simply won't play. So you're gonna want to keep your subtitles on. Aside from a very specific 5-minute section of gameplay with the worst mouse acceleration that I've ever experienced, the game plays very well on a mouse and keyboard. And of course, all controls are fully rebindable, though it does have a bit of conflict of context going on in that one key tries to do way too many things, and oftentimes you're going to be doing the wrong thing at the wrong time and it's going to piss you off, and there is no way to bind a lot of these actions to separate keys. Xbox 360 pads are obviously supported just as well as if you're playing on an Xbox, and even has an option for turning off aim assist. All in all, it's a well done PC version. It's a very large step up visually compared to consoles, of course. There's no embarrassing leftover UI prompts. And the few technical issues I've had with the game were recently patched out. So there you go, Splinter Cell Blacklist. An absolutely stellar single-player and co-op experience on par with Chaos Theory. And now you're probably wondering, wait, this sounds like the wrap-up, but I haven't talked about versus mode at all. There's a very good reason for that. I have a lot of words for versus mode, but I'd prefer to keep them in their own focused video. So just consider this part 1. This has been a FlipFox's I've been playing too damn much. Thank you very much for your time. I'm gonna go beat my friend's score in a mission now. See ya!